Hey everyone, and welcome to our latest Blender tutorial. In this episode, let's look at how to create this really cool sci-fi scene. Hopefully you enjoy it, and let's not waste any time talking, let's get into it. So to start off, just a few things you might need to know if you're using Blender for the first time. I'm using Cycles Render, as you can see here. I'm using Blender 2.79b, and yeah, that's about it. So let's get straight into it. We're going to want to sadly remove our default cube. It served us well, but yeah, we don't need it. So let's hit delete and enter to get rid of that. Okay, the first thing we're going to need to complete this scene is we're going to need to enable an add-on. So you can do this by clicking File in the top left-hand corner and going down to User Preferences. Once that's loaded, in this little search panel here, type in Landscape. Now, you might have already had this enabled like me, but if not, it will probably look like this. So all you need to do is check this little box next to it and click Save User Settings. Upon doing that, we can close this box down, and now let's press Shift A on our keyboard to add in a mesh. And if we scroll right to the bottom, we'll see the landscape modifier we've just enabled. So let's select that, and you can see here that it's added a nice landscape. What looks like a mountain scene, perhaps? Open up your side panel here, you'll see that we've actually got another noise tool for the landscape, which is a control an effect for this add-on. So let's click on operator presets, and instead of mountain, which is currently selected, let's go to rock. And now you'll see that what this has done is it's created a nice low poly rock for us, and that's what we want. So what I'm going to do now is to give it the shape of the final rock that you saw in the finished scene. I'm going to hit S to scale and Z to scale on the Z axis. So I'm going to scale this up till it's nice and long. That's kind of the style of sci-fi rock that I'm looking for, but it's probably facing the wrong way that I want it to do. So I'm going to rotate it by hitting R and Y to rotate on the Y axis. So I'm going to rotate it until it's at an angle that I think looks kind of cool. So you can rotate it to whatever you feel comfortable, but that's something that I think will work. So I'm going to select this blue line and drag it up on the Z axis and drag it across by selecting the red arrow on the X axis. So it's at the edge of my grid here. I might just rotate that a little bit more so it's facing down a bit, but that's pretty good. So what I'm going to do now is I want there to be a few bits of rock jagging out of here. So instead of adding a whole nother mesh, let's select this one. You can see it's selected by the yellow outline, and press Shift D to duplicate. Now you'll see that's created a duplicate object, or a double of what we've just made. So let's move this along on the X axis a little bit, and then hit S to scale it down. And maybe scale it on the Z axis by hitting S and Z just a tiny bit. Maybe scale it up a bit more, don't want it too little. I'm just going to move it around till it's at a location that works. Let's move it across on the Z. Let's rotate it on the Y a little bit, rotate it on the Z a bit more, scale it on the Z a little bit, maybe a bit too much there. Okay, maybe just move it forward here. Gonna scale it on the X. Let's see how that's looking. Okay, now that's starting to look pretty cool. That's actually kind of got a cool sci-fi element happening to it. So the next thing we're going to need to do, once you're happy with how your rocks look, is add a rock mound for them. That way they don't look like they're just floating in 3D space, which they currently are. So let's go Shift A and use our best friend, the landscape modifier, by selecting landscape. And this time we don't actually want a rock. So we're going to jump across to operator presets and select operator presets, that's this in the landscape controller here. And let's select mountain 1. It doesn't really matter which mountain you select, but they do sometimes give slightly different results. But anyway, what we're going to do, let's move this across so it's roughly about where the mound would be for these two rocks, and then let's scale it up so it covers the the base of these rocks. So you can see, no doubt, what I'm doing here is that I'm giving it so these rocks look like they're kind of shooting out of the ground, which is, I think, a kind of cool sci-fi planet look. I might even scale this up on the Z to make it a bit higher. It could almost be a giant like crystal or something like that, depending on what your imagination allows for. Maybe just scale it up a little bit more. Okay, now I'm just going to select everything by hitting Shift and then selecting my objects and drag it up until it's at level with my grid. So I'll just go into orthographic mode. You can do that if you wanted by pressing 1 and 5 on your number pad. Okay, that looks pretty good. The next step is we're going to want to add in some terrain. And you might have trouble guessing what we're going to use, but Shift A, and our best friend again, the landscape add-on. So now that we've got this selected, we've got a nice mountain here again, and that's okay. In fact, what we're going to do is hit S to scale that up, and then 10 to scale it up by 10. Now you might be thinking that looks pretty awful, but that's okay, because the next step we're going to do is hit S to scale it on the Z axis. Now you don't have to do this, but the reason I use a mountain landscape for my terrain is just it has some nice bumps and everything already built in, so it saves the hassle of making and deforming your own mesh. So now I might just move this forward a bit, maybe even scale it up a little bit more. Okay, that's looking pretty cool. Now I think we just need one more rock, so let's go ahead and using Shift select everything until we've got our rock mound here selected, and hit Shift D to duplicate it, and hit X to make sure it is symmetrical with our current rock formation, and then I'm going to hit R to rotate it on the Z axis, and then 180 to rotate 180 degrees, and enter to confirm that's what I want to do. Okay, so now we've got this kind of cool entrance happening for our sci-fi scene. So I might actually just fix this rock up quickly because I kind of want that to be on the other side of this, so the smallest rocks are closest to where my camera is going to be. You can do the same if you think that it's necessary, but if not, just bear with me for a second. Okay, that's alright. Again, my OCD no longer hurts. So now let's go ahead, and you can probably guess what's missing to make this look like a real terrain. We need something on the ground. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually create grass. And there's plenty of amazing grass tutorials for Blender already on YouTube. So if you want, I can leave a link in the description if you would like to see some of those. But otherwise, I'm going to do a really simple grass effect that will just help convey the overall feeling of this scene. So what I've done now is I've just gone by selecting this little box down here, and I've gone to another visible layer. Essentially, these layers work so that you can have different workspaces all within the one Blender project. So you won't lose anything by clicking on a new workspace. So by clicking on that new workspace, this is where we're going to make our individual blade of grass. So just press 7 to go to top view, and Shift A, and this time I'm going to add a plane in. Now I'm going to hit Tab to go into edit mode, and just down here in my object select settings, I'm going to just make sure I've got edge select enabled, because I want to be able to select the edge of my square plane, not any of the vertices or the face. So make sure you've got edge select enabled, and then I'm going to hit E for extrude and X to extrude it on the X axis. And what I'm going to do is as I extrude it, I'm going to hit S and scale it on the Y axis a little bit smaller. If you can kind of imagine the shape of a blade of grass, E to extrude on the X axis, S to scale on the Y, making it small as we go along, E to extrude along the X axis one last time, and finally scaling it right down on the Y axis to a nice little point, and maybe just dragging that up a little bit more so it's slightly more pointy. Okay, that's looking pretty cool, but let's make it a bit more interesting by selecting our other edge, scaling that a little bit, on the Y by hitting S and Y, but not too much, and extrude it one last time along the X and scale it on the Y. That's a pretty cool looking blade of grass, but it is lacking something. Blade a blade of grass in the real world is not perfectly flat. So let's fix that. So in edit mode, just making sure you're in edit mode, hit A to deselect everything, then A to completely select everything. Your object should be orange if everything's selected. So once we've done that, let's hit W, and this brings up some special options in edit, and one of them is called subdivide. If you're not sure what subdivide means, think of a block of land and then think of what it would mean to subdivide that land into smaller blocks. Essentially, that's what we're doing with our 3D mesh. So here we've got some options for subdividing. We have number of cuts, and it's currently at 1. I'm just going to change that to 2 to give us a bit more room for movement, you could say. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable face select and just select one of the faces in roughly the middle of my blade of grass, and I'm going to enable proportional editing. To do that, just press O, the letter O on your keypad, and you should see that this little icon here lights up. If it's not on, it'll be grayed out, but when it is enabled, it will be nice and highlighted. Yes, okay, good English. So now next what we're going to do is we're going to grab this face up on the Z-axis, and you can see what proportional editing is doing is that it's not just editing that one face. If I hadn't enabled it, you would see that's what would be happening. Not very effective. But with proportional editing enabled, when I drag this one up by scrolling in and out on my mouse, I can affect just how much of the blade of grass I want to curl. And I want it all to curl, so I'm just scrolled really far out. If I zoom out, you'll see. And now our blade of grass has a nice curl to it, as if it was grass that were just growing realistically, not in Blender. Nice. So let's hit Tab to get out of edit mode and enable smooth shading. And that is a beautiful, albeit low poly piece of grass. So let's now, before we go back to making our grass terrain, let's just give this a name. Go over here into Object Settings, and instead of calling it plane, let's call it something crazy like grass. Okay, now we can go down here and select our other layer, and once again we see our Sci-Fi terrain. So let's go ahead and just select the land, our main land plane, and let's give it some grass. So what we're going to do to give it some grass is add a particle system. So you see these little icons here that look like small sparks. We're going to select that and press, with making sure our plane's selected, press New Particle System. And here we have a new particle system. Now if I were to hit Alt-A or play right now, you would see that there's lots of little particles falling from it. That is not what we want. What we want to do first of all is make sure that we're using our grass that we just modeled. So let's go down here to Render Settings, and instead of having the default halo selected, let's go over to Object. And under here we can select an object to generate on our plane. So we're going to click that, and hopefully you should see grass just underneath camera. So let's select grass. You still probably won't see anything, but if I press Alt-A or play again, you see now it's raining blades of grass. We don't want that, so what we're going to need to do to stop this physics simulation happening is go to Physics Setting and click No Physics, because our grass shouldn't move anywhere. So now we still don't see anything, but if we play, we see our grass growing over time. That's because we have our emission settings set to grow from frame number 1 through to frame 200. So to stop that, so we can have all our grass here at once, let's hit the in frame and put in 1 so that it starts and ends on the same frame, or in other words, it exists indefinitely until it reaches frame 50 apparently. Why is that? Because our lifetime settings over here are set to 50. So let's just change that to 250. So you can just copy the settings here on my screen if you want. I've got start and end set at 1 and lifetime set to 250. So in other words, for our whole timeline, our grass will now stay there. But obviously it's still looking a little bit barren. So what we can do to fix that is go ahead and increase our number of grass from 1,000 to 20,000. So now you can see there's a lot more grass here, but it doesn't quite look right. In fact, if I were to render that briefly, you can see that it's all mostly lying flat, not horizontal, not vertical like it should be. We can fix this by going down to our rotation settings here. Just check this box next to rotation, and let's just increase our initial orientation to something like 0.6. What that's done is it's given it a random orientation, but kind of like you would expect to see in a kind of cool overgrown sci-fi grass field. And because this is just the basics of what we're learning. So let's add some more grass, because that's probably a bit too large, because I want this to have quite a grand feel. So let's make our grass a bit smaller by going down to render settings and changing the size from 0.05 to maybe something like 0.03. Now we might just change our random size to 0.1 to give it a bit of variety, but not too much variety. But you can see now that if we go to render, our grass field's missing a lot of grass. One easy way to fix this and to complete our look is to simply just go up to our emission number and change that from 20,000 to 200,000. A brief warning though, when you do this, your computer will run a lot slower. So let's just save that till the very end, and then we'll see how that looks. So now that we've got our basic landscape and rocks created, the next part of our tutorial is going to involve creating the textures or materials and the environment or lighting. So to create some realistic lighting, we're going to go back up to File and down to User Preferences. Let's go and now search for a new preference, or for a new, let's go search now for a new add-on, and this time let's just type in dynamic, and here it comes up straight away, dynamic sky under lighting. Now if you just click that checkbox, make sure it's highlighted, and click Save User Settings. What you should see now, you probably already saw this on my screen because I already had it enabled, but on your screen you should now see under Tools an option to create a dynamic sky. So let's hit Create, and nothing happened. Why is that? Well, simply put, we have to enable this dynamic sky. We can do this by going to World Settings, which is symbolized by the planet or the world symbol, selecting that, and changing and clicking this icon down here once more and selecting Dynamic 1. With that selected, if you render by pressing Shift Z now, you see that we've now got some nice lighting. But our scene is quite white, and that's all white. Now that's alright. So let's go and now give it some materials. So first of all, what I might do is I might give our grass material. So let's go over back to where we create our blade of grass and just select that. Now, some sci-fi concepts I've seen have been pretty cool because they've created like not just green grass but other colored grass like red grass. So I think that might be something that would be kind of cool in this environment. So let's go ahead and add a new texture and change it from diffuse to principled shader. I'll include a link to a video that explains why we use the principled shader if you are interested in learning that. But otherwise, let's go ahead to base color and drag it down. And I'm going to make it maybe red. You can make it whatever color you want, whatever you think would look cool. So I'm just going to give maybe a bit more brown than red. Okay, that should be alright. Now let's go back to our field and let's just see how that's looking now that we've enabled our color, and we can see that that's affected the color of all our grass, and it's all a nice red, which is good. So next, let's go ahead, and I might just we might do our rocks next. So let's just select our first rock, and by going down to the corner here, what we can do is we can see these three little lines. We can drag that out to duplicate our screen. So now, by selecting this box here, we can change it to what is called Node Editor. Node Editor basically enables us to edit these things called nodes. What that does is it helps us to affect or modify the material we will be giving our objects. So to make sure the screen's at full size, just press N to remove this side box, or alternatively just drag it across. And now let's, in our material settings, which is up here, sorry I forgot to say that before, let's enable a new material, and straight away you can see it's changed the shading of our rock. That's because it now has a white material. So let's go ahead and get rid of that diffuse, because we're not going to use it. Once again, I'm going to hit Shift A, and we're going to add a principled BSDF shader. So you'll see that goes wherever your mouse does, so just click to drop it, and then connect the green to the top green of our material output, our BSDF shader, to surface. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to do something a bit different, and we're going to hit Shift A and add in an image texture. What we can do now with that image texture added in is connect color to color and click open to add a nice texture. And you can see here that I already have some textures ready to go. If you'd like to use these textures, I got them all from polygon.com. Polygon is a great website where you can access hundreds of textures that all come with displacement and normal maps, all the maps you need for 3D animation. So if you want to use these textures, go ahead, sign up for a free 30-day trial from there. This video isn't sponsored by them, but you can access those textures there by signing up for a free 30-day trial or subscribing if you'd like to have them at your convenience anytime. So the textures I've got here, I've got Rock Brown 012 and Rock Brown 014. So they're the two textures I'm going to be using. So I'm going to select the color variation 1 of this Rock Brown texture and open that image. So now if I go to render, you'll notice it's given our rock a nice brown color. But we want a bit more than a brown color, we want a texture. So to enable that texture, let's hit Tab to go into edit mode. You can see it's got a lot of faces, and let's hit U to unwrap and hit Smart UV Project. Okay, and now if we go and add a tab edit mode and go to render, we'll see it's applied very nicely our rock texture. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this material a bit further, I'm going to Shift D and duplicate this image texture, go down and just make sure my color is now set to non-color data, because the next image I'm going to load, I don't want it to affect the color of my rock. I'm just going to get rid of that and hit open, go back to my textures, and this time I'm going to select Rock Brown 012 NRM or normal, so it's just like purple colored 3D kind of looking texture. I'm going to open that up and I'm going to drag that into normal. Now you see that that has done nothing really amazing, because we've got to hit Shift A and add in a normal map between this and the principled node. So now what that's done is it's enabled our rock geometry to have bumps in it that you can see. You can increase them. I change the strength up to 10. You can see quite dramatically how it's affecting our rock texture, but I'm going to leave that one. Okay, so now let's go ahead and apply this rock texture to our other large rock over here by pressing Tab, U to unwrap, Smart UV Project, OK. And under here we can see, if we scroll down, the bottom material number 3, I might just rename that to Rock 1. I've just applied that, so now both these two rocks have this image applied to it. For our next rock, let's go ahead and give it a slightly different material. Let's go ahead and press New, get rid of Diffuse, Shift A, Principled, add that in, connect it to Surface, Shift A, Search, Image, duplicate that, non-color data, and finally Shift A, Normal Map, and add that in there. Connect it all up like it's meant to be connected, and then let's load in our new image, which in this case will be Rock Brown Variation 14. Load that up there, and then bottom one, Rock Brown Variation 14 NRM or normal map. Okay, now if we look at that and just call this material rock 2. We'll see once again, it's affected our rock, but we have it unwrapped. So let's hit Tab U, Smart UV Project, unwrap. And let's do the same with the other little rock here. Tab U, Smart UV Project, unwrap. And then finally, let's make sure we give that a rock 2 material. Let's do the same with our mound 2. Tab U, Smart UV Project, OK. And maybe give that rock 1. And over here, Tab U, Smart UV Project, OK. And we'll give that rock 2. So now basically, if we go to camera mode, we can do that just by pressing 1 and then Control-Alt-0 to assign our camera to this view. But I'm going to hit N, just click Lock Camera to View, and that enables me to move my camera around to a bit better position. What I can see is that, maybe just tilt that a bit. I might just grab these, move these into the center a little bit. And now hit Shift Z to render. And our scene is starting to take shape. And that's looking pretty cool. Might just zoom in my camera a bit. And if you want to see any of the things I'm doing, you can see here. I've got the screencast keys enabled so you can see. So basically what I'm going to do is I'll provide a link to a cool little image that you can use and to give our background some cool kind of sci-fi feel. I'm going to hit Shift A. What we're going to do is we're going to enable one final add-on. So let's go to File, User Preferences one final time, and this time let's type in planes. And here we can see image, import, export, import images as planes. Check that box. Save user settings. And now here back in our scene, let's hit Shift A, add in mesh, and you should see down the bottom images as planes. And I'll provide a link to this in my Dropbox or Google Drive. And what this is basically is it's one of Saturn's rings, but it creates a really cool sci-fi feel when it's in the sky. So let's just select that. Make sure you've got Use Alpha selected down here in these settings and Emit, so it creates its own light, as it would if it were a real planet. Now let's import that image as planes, and drag it up, scale it up. Let's just switch from solid view to material view, that way we can see what we're working with here. So I'm going to rotate that on the X, just drag it up a little bit more, and scale it up. And maybe rotate it on the Z a bit, or even the Y, yeah. So maybe I might scale it on the Z, so it's a bit skinnier, because we don't want it looking identical, and we want it to have a kind of cool feel to it. And I'm going to scale it on the Y, lift it up a bit, and I think that's pretty cool. It's not just there present in the background, so now we can see we've got this cool sci-fi ring in the background. But what's more is we need something to fill our background with. We're going to hit Shift A and import one more image as planes, and once again I'll provide a link to this in my Drive or Dropbox, and this is a mountain range. Just make sure my alpha is selected with Emit and import that. What this will serve as now is a nice backdrop for our scene. So just scale that up and move it back along the Y and down a bit. And then across. Now I might just zoom my camera in a little bit. Let's get that render and see how that's looking. Okay, I think that's looking pretty cool. So now all we're going to need to do is go up and go select our grass particle system and change that from 20,000 to 200,000. What that does is it creates a nice grass field. So let's go to our render settings now, make sure we're ready to render. So what we can do is make sure that you've got your render samples on 100. Just back here in render layer settings, enable denoising. It will give you a much more polished look. Scroll down, and if you're running a GPU, set your performance from 64 by 64 to 256 here by 256. And that's everything. Okay, so now, before we render though, let's do one final finishing touch, just to make it look a little bit cooler. Let's change our scene mode from default to compositing. And let's just use nodes, and what we're going to do is we're just going to hit Shift A and add in a lens distortion. And let's just change the dispersion level up to 0.1, or maybe let's go 0.2. So what this does is just creates a kind of cool film effect. Let's go back to this default, and let's give that a render. And that's basically it, everyone. That's a pretty cool kind of sci-fi feeling environment, I think. Feel free to request a tutorial, and yeah, if you have any questions, make sure to ask below. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time.